Good morning, and welcome once again to your Renewed Faith Devotions as we reflect on the great influences of our faith. We continue with the book of intrigue in the book of Esther, and from chapter 5 I read, It so happened that on the third day Esther put on her royal attire and stood in the inner court of the palace opposite the king's quarters. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the palace opposite the entrance. When the king saw Esther standing in the court, she met with his approval. The king extended to Esther the gold scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. The king said to her, "What is on your mind, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even as much as half the kingdom will be given to you." Esther replied, "If the king is so inclined, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." The king replied, "Find Haman quickly, so that we can do as Esther requests." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. While at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your request? It shall be given to you. What is your petition? Ask for as much as half the kingdom, and it shall be done." Esther responded, "My request and my petition is this. If I have found favor in the king's sight, and if the king is inclined to grant my request and perform my petition, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them. At that time I will do as the king wishes." Now Haman went forth that day, pleased and very much encouraged. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and he did not rise nor tremble in his presence, Haman was filled with rage towards Mordecai. But Haman restrained himself and went on to his home. He then sent for his friends to join him, along with his wife Zeresh. Haman then recounted to them his fabulous wealth, his many sons, and how the king had magnified him and exalted him over the other king's officials and servants. Haman said, "Furthermore, Queen Esther invited only me to accompany the king to the banquet that she prepared, and also tomorrow I am invited along with the king. Yet all of this fails to satisfy me so long as I have to see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows 75 feet high built, and in the morning tell the king that Mordecai should be hanged on it. Then go to the banquet contented." It seemed like a good idea to Haman, so he had the gallows built. After considering Mordecai's request to intercede with Xerxes for the life of her people, Esther puts on her royal robes, enters the inner court, and seeks an audience with the king. Did you notice? When Esther is given permission to approach the king, she invites him and Haman to join her in a meal later that day. At the meal, the king asks Esther to make her request, but she declined, and she invited them to another meal the next day. As we heard, Haman tells his wife and friends about the growing anger he feels against Mordecai, and they then suggest that he build a gallows and arrange the next day for Mordecai to be hanged. Let's think about this. What do you think is the explanation for Esther's delaying tactics with the meals that she was preparing? Do you think that she lost her nerve? There are some schools of thought and commentators who think so, but I believe that the more correct interpretation to this is that her prayer and fasting had sensitized her to the proper timing of her request, and that she had perceived that the first time was not the right time, and so she called for a second meal to have with the king. Now,
The reason I say that is, doesn't time spent with God enable us to detect His perfect timing in everything?